Hello, hello. Welcome to class number 2 in 250 real ear measurement. Looks like I'm the only one here today. Anyway, no matter. We're going to cover the topic of ANSI testing, American National Specifications Institute. And there's a reason why we're covering that in this course at the beginning of our real ear measurement course. And I'll tell you the reason why. The reason we record it is because, or that we're talking about ANSI, is because real ear and ANSI often uses the very same test box. ANSI testing examines the function of the hearing aid. Real ear, on the very same equipment, checks out how the hearing aid is operating on the person. So ANSI is the hearing aid itself. Real ear is the hearing aid on the person. And very, very often they are found on exactly the same equipment. And there's another thing that people often forget, and it's ANSI. People forget about how to do an ANSI test. They don't really know what they're doing. And that's a shame, because if someone comes into an office with a new hearing aid product, and the person is saying, gosh darn, this hearing aid just doesn't sound like my old one. I like the sound of my old one better. Can you make this new one sound like my old one? It's just like there's something different about it. And then you'll see these clinicians going, and they're fussing around with the program, they're changing it a little bit, and they're going, well, how does that sound? And well, how does that sound? And they're making another adjustment. How does that sound? And instead of asking, how does that sound? Why not do an ANSI measure on the old hearing aid and then make the new hearing aid match that ANSI measurement as close as possible? Duh. Or do real ear on the old hearing aid and then measure the new hearing aid and make sure it's doing the same thing on real ear. Do you see what I mean? With ANSI measurements are objective. Real ear measurements are objective. All right? How does that sound is subjective. That's just kind of like, well, what do you think of that? That's the quality of that, you know? So our field is a mixture of art and science. It's both. It's a mixture of the head and the heart. It's both. Last time I looked, you needed both to be a person. So it's really important to have a sound grasp of ANSI and a good grasp of real ear measurement. Because guess what? There's a lot of clinicians out there that don't do real ear. And there's a lot of clinicians out there that have forgotten how to do ANSI, or they never really learned how. And so they're operating their clinics like on on some kind of a shoestring. It's just an odd, it's not really the best way to run something. So here's hoping that you all have printed up your notes from Unit 2 on 250 real ear measurement. And I'll just kind of pull up my stuff here as well. So those very same notes. I'm going to do what they call, I'm going to share screen, and I'm going to just show you those, what we can here. Okay? So I'm going to pull this up. Here I am. I'm going to share my screen, and I'll share that, and now you can likely see my notes on the side. And this is what you should have with you as well. Okay, so if I can pull this down, you'll see these notes. American National Specifications Institute. In Europe, it's called International Electrotechnical Commission, IEC. Doesn't matter. ANSI is involved in everything, from light bulbs to soup cans to God knows what. It's been around for decades and decades. And it ensures that various electrical things are doing what they're supposed to do. And in ANSI, there's a little split sliver called hearing aids. Okay? And that's what we're talking about here. I'm also going to pull up the PowerPoint we have on ANSI. And this is the PowerPoint I'm going to be showing you. All right, and what I was mentioning earlier, and I'll just make this slide bigger here so you can see it, okay? Look at this is a real ear ANSI measurement test box. It does both. If you can see my cursor here, the hearing aid test box would be in here. And when you're measuring things, you could see the result on that little blue screen. And this thing also does real ear measurement. For ANSI testing, you'll see the couplers here, the putty, okay, even the printout. This is an old system. I mean, newer ones look more like this. Now, at OTC, yours is probably an Oracle, but there's all different kinds. There's different equipments. This one's made in Canada, and it's called a Verifit. It's actually its mother company is called AudioScan. And AudioScan is sold all over the US. There's representatives from Arkansas to California. So it's a very common one. This box here, that's where ANSI testing is done. And the results are shown on that computer screen. These speakers on the top are for real ear measurement, which is done later. This is a good old 2cc coupler. And the coupler connects the hearing aid to the ANSI test box. And it's got 2 cubic centimeters of air. I'm going to go to my notes here to make sure that we're all looking at this. Let's read this together. Hearing aids are normally measured on people with hearing loss, but we'll get to that later on in the course. That's real ear. ANSI measures test the hardware of a hearing aid, the mic, the amp, and the receiver. The hardware. You all know your computer has hardware and software. The hardware is your monitor. The hardware is your keyboard. The hardware is the on-off switch. All the stuff, the actual pieces. The software is Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint, your apps. Okay, all that stuff is the software. But hardware hasn't gone away. Digital hearing aids today are run on software, but they also use hardware. They still have microphones, amplifiers, receivers. Those are hardware pieces. So hardware hasn't disappeared. Read with me here. In years gone by, analog hearing aids ruled. Analog is all hardware, no software. Okay, analog was the prior type of hearing aids before digital. Analog ruled until 1997, and then digital took over big time. Okay, in 1997 was the emergence of the first digital hearing aids. So digital has been around now for some 20 years. Okay, but hearing aids were all analog before that. And in those days, ANSI was king because analog hearing aids don't have software. They just had mics, amps, receivers. And you could change the low pitch, and you could change the high pitch, and you could change things on the hearing aid. You could change the gain. You could make them fit sloping losses, flat losses, reverse losses. Oh yeah, you could do that. But you usually had a tiny little screwdriver, and you turned a little, just like on eyeglasses. Like eyeglasses have these little weird little screws in them. Okay, and we used to have to open up the back of the hearing aid and turn those little screws, and that would change things. Okay, then when digital came out, everything became programmable. It's very important to understand the backgrounds here. Now, today ANSI is receding because software has become king. ANSI is still important for testing whether a hearing aid works or not, though, because hearing aids still have hardware. Always remember, ANSI's for hardware and real ears for testing the hearing aid on the person, but hearing aids also have software, and that's what's done on your manufacturing fitting software. ANSI is still important for testing whether a hearing aid works or not. When you're troubleshooting a hearing aid, it's good to run an ANSI test on the hearing aid to find out if it's working properly. ANSI gives you an electroacoustical analysis of the hearing aid. You need to know whether a hearing aid, if the hearing aid measured, is it performing according to specs? Now, your intact cochlea is by far the best analyzer of any hearing aid. I mean, there was a guy by the name of Ling. He was not Chinese, but believe he was English, but his last name was Ling, okay? And he would take the hearing aid and he would listen to it through the stethoscope or whatever, the stethoclips, and he would go, ooh, ah, ee, sh, s. And that's a good speech test to talk into a hearing aid microphone. Ooh is low pitch, ah, a little bit higher pitch, ee, a little bit higher, sh, s. And you're going through all the speech sounds from bass to mid to treble. And listen to the hearing aid to hear if it's distorting. But ANSI specification enables spec sheets. In other words, hearing aid manufacturers have to produce specifications. You can find these on your manufacturer fitting software on your computer. You'll see these specs. What's the maximum power output? What's the OSPL 90? Output sound pressure level with 90 dB coming in the hearing aid. What's the reference test gain? What's the full-on gain? What's the equivalent input noise? What's harmonic distortion? Okay, we're going to look at those because we should. And if you've forgotten them, the purpose of this session today is to refresh your memory of those because they shouldn't be forgotten. Calibration of your test box. First thing in the morning, you calibrate your ANSI test box and you calibrate your real ear box. Both of them easy peasy, Japanesey. Once done, it's done. The frequency response of the loudspeaker has to be flat in order to measure the hearing aid in an unbiased fashion. We'll look at that. There's two kinds of that. Don't worry about hearing aid stimuli, blah, 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 blah. Who cares? Okay, so the coupler connects the loudspeaker of the hearing aid to the measuring mic in the test box. And read with me and then I'll show you the pictures, okay? The coupler contains an air-filled chamber of a specific shape, and it's got exactly 2 cubic centimeters in it. That's about the volume of a sugar cube. It was adopted in 1959 from an old IEC standard, International Electronics Commission from Europe. It gives a rough approximation of the impedance offered by your typical ear. In English, it gives a rough approximation of the space, now remember this, of the space between the tip of the hearing aid and your eardrum. It gives you a rough approximation of that little air space that's trapped between the hearing aid and your eardrum. That's the purpose of a 2cc coupler. All right? Now, the volume of air trapped between a hearing aid ear mold and an eardrum is usually a little bit less than 2 cubic centimeters. It's usually closer to 1 to 1.5. How would I show that? 1 to 1.5, okay? And so, what takes place in a 2cc coupler is a little bit different from what's taking place in your ear canal with the hearing aid. And what's different about it? It's called real ear to coupler difference. You'll see the hearing aid doing blah, blah, blah on an ANSI test. But in the real ear, that volume of air is a little bit smaller. Remember, 1 to 1.5 cubic centimeters instead of 2 cubic centimeters. Just before we leave the word, centimeter is about the width of your fingernail. It's very important to understand metric. Even though you're in the States, metric is important, okay? All science uses metric. In fact, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a second here so you can see me closer. Here's a fingernail. Okay, I could show you this one, but you know what I mean. Okay, you've got about 2.5 of those in an inch. A centimeter is there's about 2.5 centimeters to an inch. So, at any rate, go back to share my screen here because we need to cover something quite important. The shape, the size of a 2cc coupler is a little bit bigger, and therefore it's going to underestimate what the hearing aid will do in your ear. In other words, think about this. Think if I have 70 dB SPL of sound coming out of my hands, okay? I'll stop share again so you can see this better. I've got my hands like so, okay? And I've got 70 dB coming out, and it's coming in this room. Well, what if I make the walls of this room come closer and the ceiling and floor of the room come closer, like a nightmare movie? Well, that 70 dB is going to turn into 80, is going to turn into 90, right? Because it's going to bounce off the closer walls. That's the same thing as happens in a real ear. So the difference between what will happen in a 2cc coupler versus what will happen in your actual ear is called real ear to coupler difference. And we'll talk about that in just a second. So share screen again. Here we go. Looking at your notes, looking at the PowerPoints. Couplers do not truly imitate the volume of a human of the air trapped. There we go. The actual volume is 1.5 to 1 to 1.5. The difference between a 2cc coupler and a human ear became apparent in about the early 80s, okay? Basically, the 2cc coupler with BTEs and ITEs looks quite a bit the same. There's just slight differences, and we'll talk about that. Basically, okay, KEMA. If we work our way down to here, you're going to see this thing called KEMA. Knowles Electronic Mannequin for Acoustic Research. It's time to show pictures now, okay? Here's your 2cc coupler, all right? Looking at it over here, here would be an ITE hearing aid. Here's your 2cc coupler. It's got 2 cubic centimeters. It's got the cavity, 2 cubic centimeters. And here's the measuring microphone from the ANSI test equipment. Here's a BTE. Okay, they use the ear hook, same 2cc coupler, same size. It's just that the BTE has a tube sticking out, and then you put that on the ear hook. Whereas the ITE, you put it right on the coupler, and you have to use putty, blue, this weird sticky putty stuff to stick the ITE on. All right, BTEs you don't. Here is the test box. You're calibrating in the morning. You've got 2 microphones, a reference mic and a coupler mic. And you stick these 2 together and you hit the button called calibrate, and that ensures that when you want 90 coming out, you're getting 90. When you want 70 coming out, you're getting 70. The calibration just makes sure things behave. Make sure that the coupler microphone is behaving. You're going to see, so this is a close-up picture of that. Okay, every equipment's a little bit different, but basically calibration is the first thing you do with ANSI testing in the morning. And you put your reference mic next to your coupler mic and you hit the button, go calibrate. Calibration would basically is going to look different on every piece of equipment, but you'll learn when to know that it's correct. Don't worry about this slide, it's kind of boring. Okay, but here's the frequency response of a loudspeaker in the sound box when it's not calibrated, and here's the same thing when it has been calibrated. It ensures a flat frequency response. Now you can go ahead and do your ANSI testing. And ANSI testing now is going to look like this. Here's your hearing aid. Here's the microphone, okay, that's measuring. This is that reference microphone that made sure that the coupler mic behaves. Here's the loudspeaker spitting out sound. You're trying to figure out what's the hearing aid doing to that sound. As the hearing aid applies gain to the sound coming out of the speaker, it goes into this tube here, and here's your 2cc coupler. It connects the hearing aid to the measurement microphone. And this measurement microphone is this black box here. And that little gray microphone, that is this thing here. They're all different. They're all different, okay? But at any rate, this is the general layout of an ANSI situation. This next picture is boring, so don't look at it, okay? So here's an actual photograph of a BTE with its ear hook connected to the coupler. Here's your coupler. Here's your measurement microphone. Here's that reference mic, making sure that the speakers, here's the speakers, one speaker here, here's another speaker here, making sure that that's all behaving, okay? BTE in the test box, another picture showing you the same thing. You're laying the BTE down. You've got the measurement right beside the microphone of the hearing aid. You've got the speakers are spitting out the sound. If they're spitting out 90, this microphone is saying, behave, make sure it's 90. 90 better be reaching the microphone, not 95, not 85. So this microphone is making sure that these speakers are doing what you wanted them to do. And the hearing aid's applying gain, and that total sound is being sent into the 2cc coupler, meant to imitate the space of air between the end of the aid and your eardrum, and the coupler mic is picking it up, and you're doing your ANSI test. Okay, showing you an even closer picture. That reference mic is sitting right beside the microphone of the hearing aid to make sure that the speakers are delivering the correct amount of sound. Here's an ITE. You'd be using the putty to stick it onto its 2cc coupler. So you have one 2cc coupler for an ITE and a different 2cc coupler for a BTE, but by gum, they're both 2cc couplers. There's a picture of the ITE stuck onto the 2cc coupler. And then you'd have to twist the 2cc coupler like a screw onto the measurement microphone. There it is. You screwed it on to the measurement microphone. There's your reference mic, making sure that sound from the speakers is being delivered properly to the hearing aid mic. You've got your battery inserted into the hearing aid, and go for it. Do your ANSI test. There's another picture of an ITE. Okay, same thing. Here's KEMA, Knowles Electronic Mannequin for Acoustic Research. KEMA. All manufacturers have a KEMA. It's got rubber ears, and guess what? It has couplers in the ears that are between 1 to 1.5 cubic centimeters, meant to more closely imitate what's going on in the ear, in the actual ear. So manufacturers often use KEMA to get a closer idea as to how the hearing aid will function on an actual human being, aside from ANSI. Okay, because ANSI will underestimate because it uses a larger 2cc coupler. Here's another picture of KEMA. KEMA never changes his facial expressions. He always kind of remains quite the same, never gets tired, okay? Here's a look at the coupler inside KEMA's head, okay? Meant to more closely imitate the actual human ear. So why do we still use a 2cc coupler? Because we're stupid, because we're slow. It's because once the car went by, we're kind of going, and the car's going this way, and we're still looking over here this way, you know. So that's just the way things react. In Europe, they dance a little faster. They don't use the 2cc coupler anymore. They use a smaller one, like KEMA's. Just thought I'd tell you. What's the difference between what a sound is doing in a real ear compared to the 2cc coupler? This slide comes from St. Louis, Missouri, from the state of OTC, and her name was Margot Skinner. Rest her soul, she passed away a few years ago. She wrote a textbook called Hearing Aid Evaluation, Margaret Skinner. Anyway, she's looking at look at the 2cc coupler response. And here it is in a real ear canal. Look at this. Now, what's the difference? Look at the vertical axis. The difference for the low frequencies, look at 1,000 hertz, 500 hertz, and 200 hertz. What's the difference between a 2cc coupler response versus how the hearing aid is acting in a real person? About 5 dB. See that? And what is the real ear to coupler difference in the higher frequencies above 1,000 hertz? Well, what's the distance between these two curves? About 10 dB. So keep it simple. What's RECD? Basically. That sounds like a rap song. Give me the RECD, basically. I shall tell thee. What you're going to have is, if you look at a frequency response on ANSI, add about 5 dB below 1,000 hertz, add about 10 dB above 1,000 hertz, and you'll get a real close idea as to how that hearing aid will actually be functioning on Mrs. Jones's ear. Get it? Real ear to coupler difference. Just FYI. Here's a slide of it, a different slide, and it's giving you the actual numerical numbers. Don't look at the top one, that's stupid. Look at the bottom one. 2cc coupler versus a real ear. It's about 5 dB below 1,000 hertz and about 10 dB above 1,000 hertz. Told ya. RECD, the difference between an average SPL at the drum and that measured in a coupler. Outer ear canal resonance. Good old outer ear canal resonance. Open, unaided ear canal resonance, as shown with real ear measurement. When we put the probe tube in the person's ear, almost all the way to the drum, so it's almost touching the eardrum. And now you're measuring what is the resonance of the outer ear canal, which, by the way, explains why our ears have this weird shape. So if I stop sharing and I can look at my ugly mug again, why do we have these weird looking ears? Why are they shaped like this? The reason why is so that, like a wine glass at Christmas, they resonate. And what do they resonate with? They resonate with the high frequency consonants. And this is the reason why we have about a 20 decibel lift for free between the high frequencies, so that we can better hear the sounds like sh, s, f, t, all that stuff, right? Good. Okay. Now, if I can advance this slide, that's a boring one. That's it. Okay, this is the real ear unaided response for KEMA. No, this slide's boring, leave it alone. Okay, now we need to go back to, I'm going to stop sharing here for a second, but I'm going to actually go to our notes. I won't stop sharing. I'm going to go to our notes so we can follow along, okay? KEMA, we talked about that basically. We know basically what it is. Oh, look at that. See, I even wrote down, he never gets tired. Okay, we talked about real ear to coupler difference. Okay, there's your notes about that. We're going to talk about this italicized area here in just a minute. Okay, but let's go down here a little further. Okay, we are getting right over to here. Let's remember our acoustics before we go any further. All right, listen to the acoustics here. I got to have a sip of coffee. I should gargle it and just, okay. Gain in dB versus output in dB SPL. What's the difference between dB and dB SPL? It's very important for us to have a good grasp of this. So we're harking back to acoustics here for a second, okay? Always remember, and read with me and I'll explain as well. Output, input, and gain. Remember the formula for hearing aids. Input, sound to a microphone, plus the gain of the hearing aid equals the sum total output hitting your eardrum. Input plus gain is output. Output minus gain equals input. It's 1 plus 2 is 3. Very important. Now, input sound, speech, traffic, noise, whatever sound is coming to the mic is always dB SPL. Why? Because it's the intensity of it is referenced to 0. The intensity is referenced to the ground. I'll stop sharing here. If you want to say an apartment building is twice as high as a house, you have to know where the ground is. You have to know where the bottom of the screen is. Just what you're looking at right here. You have to, if the apartment is twice as high as the house, okay, you have to know where the ground is. And the ground in sound is 0. And 0 dB SPL doesn't mean the absence of sound. It is some fixed value. Okay, what is 0 dBSPL? The softest it takes for a normal hearing human to hear a 1,000 hertz tone, not 2, not 500, 1,000 hertz tone at 1 meter distance from a speaker with 2 ears. Not 1 ear, with 2 ears. So 3 things: a 1,000 hertz tone at 1 meter distance with 2 ears. Those 3 criteria, the softest pressure it takes against your drum for a normal hearing person to just barely hear that, we call that 0 dB SPL. And what was that pressure? 0.0002 dynes per centimeter squared. We just arbitrarily, that's what we're gonna call 0. That's our ground. So if it's a whisper at 40, or average speech at 65, or yelling at 85, those are all represented as 85 or 65 or 40 dB SPL. They are absolute values. Why are they absolute? Because they are referenced to the ground. Okay? 20 dB has 10 times the pressure of 0. 40 dB SPL has 100 times the pressure of 0 dB SPL. 60 dB SPL has 1,000 times the pressure of 0 dB SPL. Remember that? Okay. Input and output are always designated in terms of dB SPL. They are absolute decibel values. Gain isn't. Gain, the middle one, is just dB. I can add 50 dB to a 10 dB SPL input, and my output will be 60 dB SPL. I can add 50 dB to a 50 dB SPL input, and my output will be 100 dB SPL. You get it? The gain is relative. 50 is 50. I can add that to anything. So gain is just what you're adding. So that's okay. But you can't add 2 dB SPL values together. I can add input 30 dB SPL plus a gain of 50 dB equals a sum total of 80 dB SPL. I can do that, like 1 plus 2 is 3. But I can't do that with 2 dB SPL values. If I have a machine making 80 dB SPL, and I bring another one right beside it, and it's making 80 dB SPL, what's my sum total? 3 dB extra. 80 dB SPL plus 80 dB SPL from 2 different machines, 83 dB SPL. So what's my gain? 3. 80 plus 3 is 83. I didn't make it up. This is the way the decibel works. That's why we call it the decibel from hell. It's based on logarithms. I'll share the screen again, and we'll look at the notes that describe this. Output and input are absolute values referenced to 0 dB SPL. Gain is a relative term. You can add gain to anything. Gain, you can add it to 10 dB SPL, to 20 dB SPL. dB SPL always represents absolute intensity values. Simple dB represents relative intensity values. Recall that 0 dB SPL doesn't mean no sound. It just means a pressure of 0.0002 dynes per centimeter squared. And that, recall from acoustics, was the softest pressure it took to hear a 1,000 hertz tone at 1 meter distance from a speaker with 2 ears. Recall from acoustics class 2 that you can't simply add 2 absolute dB SPL values together. One machine making 85 SPL, another machine doing the same thing, total them together, 88. If they were identical machines, you'd go up by 6, but you assume they're different because nothing's identical in machines. You can, however, add an absolute dB SPL and a relative one together, like 1 plus 2 is 3. Input plus gain is output. 50 dB SPL input plus 50 dB of gain is 100 dB SPL input. Okay? Very important. So when you see a graph on an ANSI spec and the vertical axis reads dB, they're talking about gain. When the vertical axis reads in dB SPL, they're talking about input or output. They have to. That's the lingo and the language of ANSI. And it's the lingo and language of our field. It behooves of us to have a grip. Okay, let's move on down to some gain terms here, kind of some things you and I are going to encounter later on in the course when we get into real ear. Okay, gain terms, functional gain. This is the way hearing aids used to be measured on people. There's a few dinosaurs around who still use this method, but nobody anymore really uses it. But before real ear, that's all they had. Functional gain. I'm going to stop sharing and just so that I can explain just right close up to you here. Functional gain. You took the headphones, you measured the person's threshold, he raised a hand, you got his hearing thresholds, wrote them all down on the audiogram, then you took off the headphones and you put the hearing aid in. And I say the hearing aid because in those days you fit monoraily. Ear, nose, and throat doctors thought we were a bunch of quacks trying to sell two hearing aids to people. Binaural fittings were not popular in the mid-1980s. Sorry, folks. People didn't like them. Are you right-handed or left? Okay, that's the one you get. Okay? So you take the hearing aid now, you put it in the guy's ear, you turn it to a comfortable value, and then you set him 1 meter in front of a speaker, and you delivered warble tones at 1,000 hertz, 2,000 hertz, 4, and then 250, 500, and they came out like ee, and then you made them softer and softer, and you measured the guy's thresholds in a sound field that way. So you compared his aided thresholds in 1 meter away from a speaker. A meter is a yard, okay? 1 yard away from a speaker. You compared his aided thresholds to his unaided thresholds under headphones. And that told you what the gain of the hearing aid was. That's why they called it functional gain. Back to our notes. Functional gain, the old original way. Aided thresholds minus unaided thresholds. It was a behavioral measure because the guy raised his hand each and every time. Okay? Okay, where am I here now? I just got to make this. Okay, here we go. Okay, I'm going to share screen. Aided thresholds. I forgot to share screen. Okay, and I don't want that. I want the notes. There we go. Functional gain. Aided thresholds minus unaided thresholds. A behavioral measure. See that in gray? Good old behavioral measurement because the person raises his hand with the headphones on, and he also raises his hands to the warble tones coming out of the speaker. And when you're measuring sound coming out of a speaker and the guy's sitting in front of that speaker, you call that a sound field. First unaided under headphones, then aided with the volume control set to a comfortable position. It reflects the difference between aided and unaided SPL at the TM, at the eardrum. Then came real ear, insertion gain. And insertion gain, you're first measuring that guy's unaided ear canal resonance. Let's go up here. You're first getting this. Okay, you got the probe tube in the guy's ear, and you're having sound coming out of the speakers of the real ear equipment. So you're not measuring the guy's thresholds anymore. You measured them first under headphones. You entered it into the computer. The computer took the guy's thresholds. It's all good. And then you measured his unaided ear canal resonance, and you got this. And then carefully holding the tube in the same place, make sure you don't move that tube. Take the hearing aid and put it in the guy's ear without disturbing that tube, disturbing it as little as possible. Turn the volume to a comfortable position and have the very same sounds come out of the speaker again. And what you would get, follow my cursor here, you would get like a line, the line would be over above. You'd call that real ear aided response. You call this real ear unaided response, and then you put the hearing aid in and you measure real ear aided response. And the difference between the aided and unaided was called insertion gain. Okay? It was quicker, just much faster. The fitting methods didn't change at all. It's not like you changed fitting method. You use the same fitting method for functional gain as you did for insertion gain. It's just the method in which you measured was different. These are all called verification. Real ear is called verification. Functional gain is called verification. Verily, verily, I say unto thee, okay? I want the truth. Is the fitting method and the hearing aid delivering what I think it's delivering? What should it deliver? Well, let's use the fitting method and get a target. And that target tells you what you should be hitting, just like throwing darts. What should you be getting? Well, let's prove, am I getting what I thought I should be getting? And you can use functional gain to do that, or you can use insertion gain to do that. And insertion gain came with real ear. It was quicker. And real ear appeared at the very late 1980s. Real ear, 1988, 89 is when real ear came into the picture. The last type of gain that we measure is sometimes called in situ. Now, this is what we do today. In today's real ear, we don't focus very much on this guy here. We only use real ear unaided response to make sure that the tip of the probe tube is nestled nicely against the guy's eardrum. Okay, that's the only reason we use this. Otherwise, we don't really care about this anymore. What we do today is we just put the tube in the guy's ear. Oh yeah, by the way, we use this to make sure that the tube is placed properly in the guy's ear. Let me finish on that point before we move on. If the tube is not far enough close to the drum, if the tip of the tube isn't close enough to the eardrum, this response will not look the same. It's going to lose its highs. See the 4,000 there? That's going to be gone. That's a dead giveaway. Guess what? Your tube tip isn't close enough to the guy's eardrum. It should be about 1/4 inch from the guy's eardrum. Okay, it should be really close. You don't have to boop, hit the eardrum. That kind of hurts. But ensure that it's very close, and you will learn in your labs how to do that. But for now, the main purpose today of using this is to ensure that you're still getting a bump at 4,000 hertz. And that tells you, yep, I'm close to the guy's drum. But really, for the most part, today we use in situ output measures right here. That's in gray. We just stick the tube in. Yep, it's close enough. Okay, put the hearing aid in. All right, and just measure what's the sum total output. We're not interested in gain anymore. We're interested today in output. Output is the groceries that are delivered to the doorstep of your eardrum. Gain is just, how did I get that output? I need to make sure that the output SPL is audible to me. I have to make sure that the aided output SPL, if that's speech, is that speech audible to me? Okay? Think of output is like bringing the bread home from the store. That's the goods. Output is the groceries. It's the bread. Gain is, how did you go to the store? Did you catch a bus? Did you walk? Did you ride a bike? Did you drive a car? Who cares? I don't really care. Did you get the bread? Okay? Output is king. And today we look more at output than we do at gain. And this is the general story that we're going to be talking about in this course. We're going to talk about functional gain, we're going to talk about insertion gain, and then we're going to finalize the course with today's insistence on in situ output. In situ is just Latin for in situation, with the hearing aid in place. In situ, what's the output? Hitting the guy's eardrum with the hearing aid in the ear. We don't care about the gain anymore. We're focusing now more on the output. Got it? Good. You know, we've only got 15 minutes left, sort of, kind of, you know. Can't go on forever, but we haven't even touched our ANSI tests. We've spent the first part, the first 45 minutes of this Zoom session talking about stuff that needs to be talked about so that we realize where we're going in this course. We'll just start on these ANSI procedures. I have no thought that we'll get totally done. I really don't, but that's okay. We'll continue on it next time. But take a look. We'll give you an overview. There's five main tests that we need to look at in ANSI. And I'll scroll down to show you. The first one's SSPL 90, or also known as OSPL 90. The second one's called full-on gain, FOG. Okay? The next one's called reference test gain. The next one's called equivalent input noise. And the last one's called harmonic distortion. Now, ANSI also tests the battery current drain on a battery current drain on a hearing aid. ANSI also tests the telecoil on a hearing aid. ANSI also looks at the compression on a hearing aid. Looking gray there, okay? It tests the attack release time of the compression on a hearing aid. It tests your directional microphones on a hearing aid, okay? ANSI tests a whole bunch of stuff. But we're not really going to cover that so much, okay? Not in this course. We are mainly going to stick to those 5 main measures. OSPL 90, full-on gain, reference test gain, and equivalent input noise, and harmonic distortion. See, the nice thing is, if you were here live, you could be asking me questions, and we could be talking back and forth here. For now, I have no choice other than to kind of carry on because we're not doing this live, but that's okay. Better recorded than nothing. And people are working and have lives and stuff to live. Everybody understands that. But this is just encouragement in the future. Should anybody attend a live session, you'd be more than welcome. It's way, as they say in Alabama, mo better. Okay? Anyway, looking at 5 ANSI procedures on what's called the hearing aid test box on the hat. Hearing aid test box. Always, we're just going to get started on these, but we won't finish this today. But always remember, ANSI equipment is the same piece of equipment as real ear. Dollars to donuts, all real ear equipment lets you do ANSI testing. ANSI test equipment usually lets you do real ear, so both. So you have the hat box and the real ear system. ANSI procedures on the hearing aid test box. Look what it says in italics here. Hearing aid adjustments are set at full blast unless otherwise specified. I'm going to stop sharing here. Now look at here. Now you get to look at my ugly mug again. All right. The first test done is called OSPL 90. It used to be called saturated sound pressure level. Used to. Now we call it output sound pressure level. The reason they used to call it saturated sound pressure level is because all hearing aids used to be linear. And linear hearing aids give you the same gain for all inputs. Not the same gain across the frequencies. Don't ever think that. Linear hearing aids could fit sloping losses, reverse losses, flat. You could reduce the bass gain, you could reduce the treble, you could add all kinds of controls, okay? The point is they gave the same gain for all input SPLs. So if you had the hearing volume control to give you 30 dB of gain, by gum, it gave 30 dB to a 10 dB SPL input. It gave 30 dB gain to a 50 dB SPL input. It gave you 30 dB gain to a 90 dB SPL input. But then finally, you'd hit the maximum power output of the hearing aid, the MPO, and then the hearing aid was like, it's saturated. Okay, and it was saturating. It had enough. It's like a sponge can only hold so much water. It can't hold anymore. And now the hearing aid is peak clipping. It's distorting. And now it's sounding like that, like I'm calling you from the bottom of the pool. Okay? So the diaphragm of the speaker is literally slapping the walls of the receiver box. That's literally what's happening. Anyway, they wanted to know what was the sound, the saturated sound pressure level. Well, today we don't use linear anymore. Hearing aids are compression. But the same concept holds true. What's the output maximum SPL? And it's called OSPL, output sound pressure level 90. With 90 dB SPL coming into the hearing aid, what's the maximum output that can come out of the hearing aid? So looking at this now, we share the screen again, looking over here, OSPL 90. The purpose was to find the maximum output that the hearing aid could possibly produce, regardless of the input. Where the hearing aid is saturating and it simply can't put out any more SPL. Today we'd say the maximum output of the compression hearing aid, because we don't talk saturating anymore. Saturating is a term that refers to peak clipping and linear hearing aids, but the concept is the same. The procedure, what's the procedure? The volume control is set full blast, okay? 90 dB coming into the hearing aid, and a frequency sweep is run. Look where it says that, sweep. It has nothing to do with a broom, okay? It's just, and the hearing aid is calculating the output. Remember, the volume is full blast. The decibel level coming out of the speakers in the test box, 90 dB SPL. You've got the hearing aid hooked up to the 2cc coupler, and what is the absolute maximum that can come out? What is shown? A frequency response curve. And you'll see numbers for the peak, high frequency peak, and you'll see a high frequency average number. So three things are shown. The frequency response, the peak OSPL 90, and the high frequency average OSPL 90. Want to see an example? Let's look at the PowerPoint slides. Let's just look at the PowerPoint slides. Move on down. Here is an example of maximum power output of a BTE measured in a 2cc coupler. dB SPL output. Right away, you know it's got to be output. There's the numbers. And plus, gain of a hearing aid would never be 130. Okay, the maximum gain of hearing aids is about 80. All right, so even just by looking at the numbers, you can tell this has got to refer to output. Here's the frequency. This is called the frequency response. Across the frequencies, it's the OSPL 90. Here is the gain. Here's maximum gain. Look at this, dB gain. See? Look at the numbers along the side. And notice that the response is a little bit less in the lows too. Just the shape. This compared to this. You see that? This is kind of like, whereas this is kind of like showing what the hearing aid would do in real life. Notice that most gain is supplied for the mid to highs. That makes sense because most people have a sloping hearing loss. Well, this just happens to be this particular hearing aid, but in a BTE, now look at a gain response of an ITE. This is just some fictitious, not that all ITEs do the same thing, obviously, just some example of its maximum gain, let's say, and here's its OSPL 90, okay? So now here is a slide showing you the RECD, real ear to coupler difference across the frequency responses of gain in a BTE measured on KEMA, who has a more normal ear canal, versus a 2cc coupler, the dashed line. And notice how the difference is about 5 dB in the low frequencies below 1,000 hertz, and it's about 10 dB above 1,000 hertz. Cool, huh? All right. This is the OSPL response of a BTE measured in an ear simulator again. And once again, you see the same RECD, about 5 below 1,000 hertz and about 10 dB above 1,000 hertz. The coupler is larger, and so the SPL is less. Make the size of the closed air volume smaller, the SPL goes up. Gain response of an ITE measured on KEMA versus a 2cc coupler again. And again, same thing with an ear simulator, OSPL 90 response instead of a gain response, OSPL 90. Same kind of differences. That's as I just gave you 4 slides so you really embed the concept in our minds. Typical OSPL 90 response. Okay, you're looking at the numbers over here. This is its maximum power output. Typical full-on gain response, showing the drop a little bit in those lows, okay, which is common. The saturated response usually has a little bit more, obviously more because the decibels are way more, but just the shape of the frequency response is what I mean. Typical frequency response at reference test gain, that's the 3rd measure in ANSI. And here's an actual example. I'm going to show you this example here. This is old ANSI measures. And I'm going to take you sort of through this a piece, okay? This thick line, OSPL 90. And read that, OSP, look, follow my cursor, OSPL 90, there's the 90 you can see, and what's shown is the line. So that's this, that's here. And then you'll see maximum OSPL. This whole thing here deals with OSPL 90, this whole top one, volume control full on. High frequency average and maximum peak. What's the maximum peak with 90 coming in? 130. Well, yeah, there's the maximum peak. That's 130. If this is 120, that's 130. And then the high frequency average, that's going to be what's the maximum power output at 1,000. Look to the bottom of the screen now. See the 1K, the little square? And then over here, just below 2K, that's 1,600. And over here, you'll see a third one, 2,500 hertz. High frequency average is always 1,000, 1,600, 2,500. Those 3 frequencies. The output at, follow my cursor, at 1,000 hertz being year, and at 1,600 hertz being year, and at 2,500 hertz being here. Those 3 outputs were added together, divided by 3 to get an average, and that's your HFA, high frequency average output sound pressure level. So you've got 3 things shown with OSPL 90. The curve itself, the frequency response. Secondly, the maximum peak output. And thirdly, the high frequency average output. Okay? Now that's that if you look at the 2nd measure. So now you've got this. Okay? It tells you all about it. It should show you the numbers for the peak, the high frequency average. Also, yeah, so the response curve is first, the peak, and the high frequency average. What's the tolerance? What should it be? The output, all these things should be within plus or minus 4 dB of what the manufacturer said it was going to be for that particular hearing aid product. Was it what the manufacturer said it was? When you looked at your specs, went into your software, looked at your hearing aid specs, was it truly there what it was supposed to be? Okay? The second one is full-on gain. Full-on gain. Fog. Here, you're leaving the volume full on, but now you're not looking at the output SPL anymore. Now you're looking at the gain. And once again, the frequency sweep is run. And the hearing aid test box is looking at the gain of the hearing aid, not the total combined maximum output. The hearing aid test box does not show a frequency response curve. Instead, it just shows numbers for the peak gain and the high frequency average gain. Look here. Volume control. Oh yeah, here. The gain. 51. Okay, it's just showing you at 60 dB, and now the volume control is left full on, but the input is no longer 90 either. The input is reduced to 60. More like real life. More like real life. What's the full-on gain with more average input levels? What's the full-on gain with average input levels? So the volume is, or I should say no, the volume here has been left full on, but the input is less. The input is now 60. And the hearing aid just shows you numbers. What was that full-on gain? And the tolerance should be plus or minus 5 dB of manufacturer's specs. Here's a third one, reference test gain. Now you no longer is the volume, now you're reducing the volume, okay? You're not leaving the volume full blast. Numbers 1 and 2, you left the volume full blast. The difference between 1 and 2 is that your input was 90 for number 1, and you were looking at the output. And number 2, you still left the volume full blast, but your input was reduced to 60, and also you're no longer looking at the output. Now you're looking at the gain. Okay? Next week, we're going to look more at reference test gain. We'll look more at equivalent input noise, and we'll look at harmonic distortion. And we're also going to look at another type of distortion that takes place in the ear, and that's called otoacoustic emissions. It has nothing to do with ANSI testing, but in a certain weird way, it does. But we'll talk more. We'll finish this topic next week. All right. Adios, my amigos. It's been a slice. I'll stop sharing the screen. You now can part with my ugly mug here. I will soon stop recording, and then I will upload this Zoom session as a YouTube video, and I'll make an announcement on your course on Blackboard about that, and I will also send to you a group class email with the attached link to that YouTube. Do you have any idea how long it takes to make a YouTube out of a 1-hour session? About an hour. I just leave the computer and go and do something else because it's just anyway. Okay, we'll see you next time. And the quiz that would be on ANSI testing, don't do it. I'm not going to give you that quiz until after next week, okay? Because otherwise we haven't finished the ANSI thing here. I want to make sure we've got this. After next week, we'll do a quick review on fitting methods. We'll talk more about functional gain. We'll talk then about insertion gain a little bit, and we'll compare some of the fitting methods, the targets among the fitting methods, to make sure we've got a good sound grasp of that. We'll probably spend 2 weeks on that, okay? Then we'll go into real ear and how it all developed and where we are today. Okay, ciao for now. Stop recording, Venema. Shut up. Okay, bye.